He's also national focal point for the MSP Global Initiative. So please welcome facilitator Dr. Andrea Barbanti. Give a hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to this first plenary session on transboundary MSP at transboundary scale, key topic for the whole forum, of course. The objective of the session is to highlight how regions and countries are developing MSP in the transboundary context. To discuss this topic, we have three great panelists and experts that will share with us their experience and advice through short presentations and a question and answer session. So before starting the discussion, I'd like to ask the presenters, the panelists, to briefly introduce themselves. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am Joakim Johannesson from the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. I've been around in this MSP world since 2011, actually, and currently I'm the project coordinator for the project that we have nationally producing plan proposals, and they are going to be presented and published within a few weeks. So we are all here, but we're also quite busy producing those plans. In addition, I've also been involved in the Baltic Sea project, in particular the part dealing with the MSPforum, which relates to this topic we will discuss soon. And also, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Helcom VASAB MSP working group since 2017, I think, together with a Polish colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Jörg. Maria?
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Georgieva, and I am a state expert at the Ministry of Regional Development and Public Works of Bulgaria. I started to work on MSP on 2014. And since the Ministry of Regional Development and Public Works of Bulgaria was designated as national competent authority on MSP, I am responsible for the coordination of MSP process in Bulgaria. I am very committed to my work because I have the possibility to create networks between institutions, different ministries, stakeholders, researchers, business, and so on. And since 2018, we were granted with the cross-border maritime special project for cross-border maritime special planning together with Romania, and I took the position of project coordinator for this project. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kofi UK. I'm coming from Ulster University in the UK. My research is actually based on the island of Ireland, so between Northern Ireland and also Ireland, and it's looking at cross-border MSP in terms of how we come up with data for the transboundary MSP on the island of Ireland. Apart from that, I've also had the opportunity of being involved in cross-border projects in the EU, such as Stakeholder, which was in the Baltic Sea, the Muses project as well. So basically, what I'm supposed to talk about has been about my experiences in such processes as well. Thank you.
So how is the session going to work? We will have two rounds of discussion and a question and answer, a session that will be based on Screen.io, the Slido-like system that it was already used in the first part of the conference. The first round of discussion is based, of course, on your experience, and in particular, we would like you to address in 5-6 minutes each aspects like drivers, most challenging issues, lessons learned, and success factors on transboundary MSP. We agreed on an order of intervention, so Joachim, the floor is yours. You may use a few slides.
Yes. Well, where do I press?
I can do it.
Yeah. The next one? The next one. Okay, so there will only be one slide for me for this part. Well, I'm representing the Baltic Sea region, and as you know, it's a sea basin with 9 littoral states or coastal states, and there is also one autonomous region. And now everyone wonders, what is it, autonomous region? Well, that's all between mainland Finland and Sweden. Well, and as we heard before, we share the nature resources, such as fish. We share the green infrastructure. And also we share the cables, and we share the very busy shipping lanes. Actually, this is one of the busiest shipping areas in the world. So indeed, transboundary cooperation is needed and necessary. And as for drivers, I would say there are 2 underlying main drivers for transboundary cooperation in MSP specifically. And the first one is that the maritime activities are increasing, in particular when it comes to offshore energy, because that's the main driver when it comes to blue growth in Northern Europe and in the Baltic Sea region as well. And also, of course, we have strong, heavy environmental concerns to deal with together. And also, as we heard before, we have the climate change that is coming as an issue that relates to all of us. So the policy response to these issues was the adoption of an MSP roadmap in 2013 by HELCOM and VASAB, setting out an aim to have coherent plans applying an ecosystem-based approach by 2020, that is next year. That will not happen, but it will happen almost in 2021. So we are on the good way of reaching that target. And also, of course, we have the EU directive coming in 2014, also extremely important for our transboundary cooperation. And that, of course, is a huge driver, at least for the EU member states. Then, of course, as this is a new task to deal with, we also need to learn more and learn how to do MSP. And there are a lot of guidelines around, and there have been guidelines around for a long time. But as I say, sometimes there is a lot of recipes, but few have actually tried them. And now we had to try them. So that's also driving for cooperation. We need each other to actually learn how to do MSP. And to do it at the regional scale and at regional level is really very good. Well, coming to the challenges. Well, countries are similar, but they're also very different. And in the Baltic Sea region, we have different planning systems in the different countries. In some countries, the plans are really regulatory, very binding, and very detailed. In other countries, they are quite strategic and guiding and not so detailed. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is that we have different administrative levels to deal with in different countries, from national to regional, and also municipalities in some cases. We also have different national perspectives and priorities, even though we share some overarching visions and objectives. We also have some unsolved bilateral issues to deal with, also in the Baltic Sea region, even though one of them was solved after our last project, the Baltic Sea project, that was about the border between Denmark and Poland. Then, of course, we have data and information. That's always problematic, and that also we heard before. Data is not aligned. We have different standards. And also, we have noticed that data sharing is very difficult because of property rights and confidentiality, and these standards again. And then, of course, as everywhere else, we are lacking knowledge. There are a lot of knowledge gaps, especially at pan-Baltic level. Well, while meeting this challenge, we have learned a lot. So now I'm coming to the lessons learned. And yes, collaboration is serious business. It takes time, and it takes resources. And by time, I mean you have to start very early, and that we did. We even did start before the legislation was in place, and that was good. And also, you need financing. And we actually used the EU system to have financing. We have had many European-funded projects, I think already since 2003. And there have been a number of projects dealing with MSP and transboundary MSP. It also helps to agree on joint principles, standards, and guidelines. And that we did through this HELCOM-VASAB working group that we heard in the first speeches today. But also the EU directive is a really good common basis for discussion. And then also, something else we have learned is that cooperation has to be done at different levels. You need to have really hands-on cooperation, dealing with real issues, trying to come up with solutions on planning issues. And that we did within our projects. We used our projects for doing that. This, especially in this Pan-Baltic Scope project, but also the predecessor. But then you also need to have formal cooperation. That's also necessary, because you have a link up to the policy level, to the politicians, and to the ministers. And that we have had through the HELCOM VASAB working group. And then, of course, we had formal consultations, but not only about environment issues, that's the normal case, but also about all issues related to the consequences of our plans. And I will also say that another lesson we have learned is that MSP is not only about planning and planners. MSP has been, as you know, added to the current or existing marine governance system, where we already have a lot of other institutions in place. For example, the Law of the Sea, we have the IMO regulating shipping, we have the Regional Seas Conventions, and of course, within the European Union, we have the Common Fisheries Policy. And that we have to relate to. And transboundary cooperation, or MSP, needs to find a place in these 6 structures for transboundary cooperation. And that's necessary because we have to be part of this big complex. So we cannot be only planners and planning. Well, to conclude, I'm convinced that in the Baltic Sea we have benefited from intense and long cooperation. And I'm also convinced that the special plans will be better, more coherent than they would have been without cooperation. And that working together really yields better plans. And that we can see. There is something called base map, where all the plans will be put once they have been adopted. But we already tried to put the proposals there. And we can see that the plans actually, on the map, they look coherent. Then, of course, there can be differences when it comes to actual regulations or whether they're guiding or binding. But at least on the map, they look quite coherent. And finally, not only the MSP roadmap from 2013, nor the EU legislation, but also this HELCOM VASAB working group and all the EU financing have been instrumental for triggering and supporting the intense cooperation in the Baltic Sea region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joachim, for this very dense presentation, delivering messages and then presenting your experience on the Baltic Sea. Now let's move to the Black Sea. Maria, before giving the floor to Maria, I'd like to invite you from now to use the Slido-like system to deploy your questions, to be prepared for the question and answer session that will follow the presentation from the speakers. Maria?
Yes. The main drivers behind the transboundary cooperation was the implementation of directive of the MSP directive. Also, the identification of main institutions from Bulgaria and Romania related to MSP, and establish the institutional and legislative framework in both countries. Agree upon a common methodology for analysis and special planning for maritime cross-border area, exchange data, preparation of the pilot cross-border maritime special plan for the area Mangalia-Shabla. The most challenging issue was agree upon a common understanding about the work that has to be done. This was our pilot exercise in both countries on MSP. We all were aware about the process in theory, but when we started to do it in practice, we realized that each partner has his own idea on priorities, time schedule, and practical implementation. Also, fragmentation of knowledge and differences in national data availability. What was the most useful lesson learned? It was the process of transposition of MSP directive in Bulgaria and the establishment of executive body, which is named Consultative Council for the Elaboration and Implementation of National MSP, including all concerned ministries, universities, professional organizations, and main companies in the marine sectors. increase public awareness about the importance of MSP process, not only at national level, as well as at the sea basin level. And what would be my main advice? From the very start of the preparation phase of the national MSP to create operational expert network from all concerned institutions, researchers, NGOs, local authorities, and key player businesses. That's all.
Thank you, Maria. We will have time through the second round and
Yes, I will put the second.
yeah, and your questions to enter in more details on the different aspects. Now, Kofi, it's your turn to deliver messages and experiences on the North Sea.
If I can have the pointer.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. So I think I missed the mic in the introduction session. So my name is Joseph Kofi Anso from Ulster University again. And okay. Yeah, there you have it. Okay, so I think I'm going to re-echo most of the points that my co-panelists have also stressed on in terms of some of the challenges of transboundary MSP. But my role is to talk about the North Sea and also in the wider Atlantic as well. But in terms of the context, it's basically just this map to show what is MSP, how is the development going in the North Sea, and also in the Northern Atlantic as well. And I believe the North Sea is a bit different. It's a marginal sea connected to the Atlantic. And in terms of some of the other sea basins that my co-panelists have talked about, which is a bit more enclosed seas. But then again, the North Sea is also very busy. It's a busy sea as well. I mean, in terms of maritime activities, we can talk about commercial fisheries, we can talk about shipping and maritime transport, because then it hosts some of the biggest ports in the world as well. Then again, there is also offshore renewable energy. The UK alone accounts for about 40.1% of offshore renewable energy installations in EU. So that shows you how busy the North Sea has been over the years, and also the Atlantic area. But apart from that, I think that has been the major driver for MSP in terms of addressing all these sectorial conflicts. I think this has been a major driver for implementation of MSP. I mean, some of the countries in the North Sea were the first to actually adopt MSP, even before the MSP directive. So this has been the main driver for MSP. But apart from that, there has also been the fact that there is the need to share experiences between countries, and I'm referring to some of the projects that has gone on in the North Sea and the wider Atlantic as well, in terms of TP, the SEMKEL project, which I was involved in, and the current ones as well, like SEM Atlantic. So there has been over the years the need to ensure cooperation through the MSP directive, and that has been another driver for transboundary MSP in the North Sea and in the Northeastern Atlantic. In terms of challenges, I think I have categorized them into three main challenges, which I think affects transboundary MSP. I'm talking about conceptual fragmentation, institutional, and also governance fragmentation, and also temporal fragmentation, which some of my co-panelists have already talked about. Because then most of these nations have different priorities that they are looking at. They are looking at developing MSP in different ways. So for example, the UK goes for more of a policy-based plan, whilst countries like Germany, Belgium are looking at more of a zoning approach. So when it comes to planning of cross-border area, definitely there is always that kind of challenge in terms of which planning criteria could be applied. Are you applying more of a zoning approach? Are you applying more of a policy-based approach? So for example, Ireland like this choose to go for a hybrid between the policy and also the zoning approach for planning. And I think this is one of the major challenges that comes when you are talking about planning cross-border area. Then there is also the institutional and the governance aspect, because then what we need to realize is there are different institutions that are implementing MSP. Even at a national level, there are some institutions leading MSP at the regional level. Then when you come to even the supranational level, when you come to the North Sea, we are talking about OSPA. And that there is always discussion about can OSPA take up the direction like that HELCOM VASAB have in terms of directing MSP at that kind of level. So there is always these institutions that exist, but then they don't have the right remit to actually guide MSP implementation at that sea basin level. So this is one of the challenges that can also come up. And what we've already talked about is the timescales and the fact that MSP is being implemented in a staggered approach. So we are all not starting at the same time. Most of the nations are at different levels. So for example, Germany is already in the second cycle of plan implementation. Belgium is already in their third, if I'm not wrong. And Netherlands is already in the fourth cycle of MSP implementation. The practical challenge here is that we all can't have the same reporting times in terms of even undertaking the same time their stakeholder engagements. And this brings about challenges when you are talking about transboundary MSP. So just to move on that quickly, to talk about some of the lessons and successes that there has been. I believe that I think there is always the need to identify what's the need for transboundary MSP, what's the need, and because definitely as we talk about, it should be fit for purpose. It should always be fit for purpose. And from the experience in SimKelt, during the SimKelt project, I think one of the discussions that we had was who should be leading such MSP transboundary process at that level. But through the project, I think it's incited most of the planning authorities to start meeting by themselves. And when the project finished, I think what was realized that what was most important was just getting the member states and the planning authorities to start meeting by themselves. And I think that's what they've instituted right now within the Celtic Sea, to start meeting between the marine planning authorities in Ireland and also the UK as well. So I would say transboundary MSP should always be geared towards what the need and what the context is. Apart from that, I think it's always important that when we are talking about which institutions, which mechanisms should we use, I think it's important that we use these existing mechanisms that are already existing. I mean, we talk about this a lot, about not reinventing the wheel. And I think in the UK, it's been very important. They've been able to use the Marine Planning Partnership or the Coastal Partnership to also facilitate the implementation of MSP, not only at the national level, but also they've been very much important in coordinating cross-border discussions. So for example, the Solway Firth, which was also part of the SimKelt project, have been involved in both MSP processes in Scotland and also in England as well. And I think I'll continue my other submissions in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi. Maria. Okay. Starting from this baseline that is kind of compiling the experience and the messages from the three sea basins, North Sea, Baltic, and Black Sea, I'd like then to invite the panelists to further elaborate on how make lessons learned replicable, this is the key word, and on what can be done in the future to improve the process. Joachim, the floor is yours.
Yes, I will focus on the enabling conditions for transboundary cooperation, and it links very much to what I said before, that you have to have the policy level on board because you're dealing with other countries, and at some point it gets you come to issues that you need to involve your Department of Foreign Affairs. So that's very important. So if you have the policy level on board, it's easier to do transboundary MSP. Then, of course, you have to have funding. As I said, you have access to funding to do it because it's very costly. Because you need a lot of meetings. And, for example, in the Baltic Sea region, we are 9 countries plus 1 region. So that means a lot of meetings, a lot of people involved. And also, another fact is that you should have common visions and objectives. And you do not necessarily have to invent them because there are a lot of objectives and visions around. You might have refined them and to do some MSP specific, but I think you can start with the the objectives you already have in place. And then, of course, when it comes to institutional structures, well, you can use, as I said before, you can use projects for hands-on planning. But then for the more formal cooperation, you can use the existing structures, if appropriate. I mean, it really depends on region. And as you said, Kofi, it should be fit for purpose. I mean, it's about the context, but I think you can use, there is already a lot of structures to be used for this type of cooperation. Then, of course, when it comes to knowledge, knowledge is really enabling, and you should share your own knowledge. That's very important. And you should get your joint and common knowledge together. That's also important. That's also an enabling factor for Transboundary MSP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Maria, can you? You need your second slide, sure. Here it is.
Yes, best practices in terms of cross-border cooperation.
The microphone.
I fully agree with my colleague that the basis of the applicable of the best cross-border coordination and cross-border MSP is a good legislative framework and relevant procedure for MSP elaborated in both countries, and also identified all relevant stakeholders, experts and researchers, and carry out different cross-sectoral workshops and thematic seminars. For example, seminar transport and MSP, tourism and MSP, what we did together with Romania at different level. Also, is very important to do it at different level, at decision maker level, at expert level, at stakeholder level, at local level also, because there is there is differences between the understanding between needs and identification of different conflicts because of the levels that we organize different workshops. I use cross-border dialogue platforms and cooperation mechanism with respect to the international agreements, conventions and treaties signed by each Black Sea country or other sea basin countries. And the best practices that we identified, they are shown on the screen, identifying local and transboundary interests in sectors and key uses, deepening knowledge and understanding on different national MSP processes, aims and objectives, and common solution to shared problems, a common vision, which is very important, and common goals to boost economic growth, especially for the Black Sea. And what we could do in the future to improve the process for the Black Sea, very important is to create professionals and to create professionals in the field of MSP, different expertise, because we are a lack of expertise in this field up to the moment. Early involvement of stakeholders in the process, and much more cooperation is needed also among different stakeholders. That's all.
I think I would just follow on from the point that you made about the fact that there should be collaborative capacity. And I think this comes at two levels in terms of the MSP project. But then again, it's also about the length of the MSP project. Should we be having more time for the MSP projects to form more cooperation? But apart from that too as well, I believe within the institution, within the authorities that are leading MSP, there should be that capacity for them to collaborate by themselves, to be involved more in other nationals' MSP processes as well. But then I will end this by saying that I think we need to move to the point whereby we are looking at more output-based cooperation, whereby we are looking at how do we get our institutions and authorities to start cooperating, how do they, in terms of even the maps that they show, how are they showing other nations' map? And this is the practical, at the practical level, when you get to some of the discourse and discussion, the data that we are talking about, how are they showing cross-border data as well during MSP discussions as well. And that's where I think we need to be moving towards that. Even for transboundary projects, should we maybe start a discussion about showing compliance to, how can the transboundary projects show compliance to the marine plans involved or the marine plans that they are spanning across. Maybe some of these discussions that we should be actually having, not only through projects, but on the practical level, how are we showing that we are cooperating too as well? Thank you.
Thank you to the three panelists for their, introduction. Now we have a lot of questions from you. And while the speakers were presenting their view, I was trying to go through the questions which are presented on the screen, part of them, trying to identify the most relevant, to me at least, for our speakers. And I'd like to start with a question for Joachim on the Baltic Sea. And I'm very curious, as the person that posed the questions, to know, just a second.
Is it, Andrea, that one on the screen now, the Denmark and Poland situation that you were looking for?
No.
Okay.
Just a second.
Just trying.
We are kind of ahead of time, so on schedule. What do you mean? No, just a second. Throw you. So I cannot find the questions anymore. But the point is, since the Baltic is a great example of transboundary MSP ongoing, the question was asking, what else should be done? What are the most important next steps you see to progress on your process? Meanwhile, I will find the question.
Yes. Actually, we already have some plans in place. It's not like the situation in the North Sea, but we have some plans in place, and we also are on the second round for some countries, and the rest of the countries are coming now. So we will have planned the more or less the entire part of the Baltic Sea, except Russia. That will, well, still waiting for some legislation, but that will come, I'm sure. So we will have marine special plans in place, but we need to do to continue with is actually data. It's sharing data to find joint planning evidence, because we are still lacking a lot of information to support our planning. That's one big issue I think we have to deal with.
Okay. Then I'd like to take the question on the ocean decade, since we have had a very nice keynote speech on the decade, and it's the topic of the day, let's say. I'd like to take the question on, do you see Oceans Decade as a platform for transboundary cooperations? Who from the panel want to give an answer on this? Kofi, maybe? You? No? So is this meaning that, in your view, the decade is still, say, far from your experience and your needs at the moment?
No, I think it's not too far. So the question, do you see the Ocean Decade as a platform for transboundary cooperation? Definitely. I think whatever that we do in MSP is always a build-up from what is actually in terms of data that has been collected in terms of scientific collaboration. And I think MSP can learn a lot from collaboration that is happening outside of MSP. I think that's where we could be looking at to see within the Ocean Decade, how do we get politicians on board? How do we get this high-level people on board? So definitely, I would say it's definitely a platform to push the agenda of transboundary MSP, push it out there and get the people at the high level involved, definitely.
Thank you, Kofi. One more question. I'm very curious to ask again and ask more details on to Maria on what was the main driver for starting transboundary MSP in the Black Sea.
As I told, the main driver was the transposition of the directive, and we were, yes, the main driver. And after that, really, because for us, the MSP is completely new process. It was a completely new process. And we started with new, I have to say that the MSP was very well investigated from researchers. All this marine, from people dealing with marine research in different institutions, but as national, between the national authorities and the local authorities, the MSP still, up to the moment, mostly at the local, how to say, the local level, it's not too much known and understood. For that reason, we started to work very much with at local level also with the local authorities, because this is very important with all these authorities on the coastal area. And for that reason, for us, the main driver was the directive. The second driver was, of course, to establish all this necessary network in both countries, in Bulgaria and in Romania, to do the directive, to do the maritime special planning. And now we have in place, in Bulgaria and Romania, the legally binding procedures for implementing the MSP. And after that, the third driver were the project Mars Plan BS, the first cross-border maritime special planning project for both countries. During the implementation of the project, we transposed both countries. We transposed the directive. We identified all main institutions in Bulgaria and in Romania dealing with the MSP, related to MSP at national and even at local level. And also, what else? And we started to exchange data and to investigate the available data. And we discovered that the data in Bulgaria and also in Romania, we have another problem. I don't know, maybe this is from former socialist countries. We have enough data, but the data is not public. And we have to, and the data is in very different formats. For example, PDF and other formats, but this is not GIS data. And we started both countries to work on collecting data and on synchronizing the data, which is very important for the cross-border, mostly for cross-border cooperation. That were the main drivers, I think, for all our cross-border cooperation.
Thank you, Maria. Now, a question. Is there a chance, I see some questions, to have a ranking of the questions?
Yeah,
Yeah, actually,
to be more democratic.
yes,
and
the
more
easiest way to give power to people here is that there's a little star sign in Skrenio. Sorry, it's very little. For our middle-aged people, it's tough to read some of them. But there is a little star sign if you have not written that sentence yourself. And by clicking that star sign, you can give a thumb up, a plus sign. And that means that people are really liking some of the sentences that are getting a lot of pluses, like there was one direct question to Joachim before about the Poland and Sweden. I don't know if you want to pick up on that, but that's the way to vote on the lines in Screeno, clicking the small star sign, and then you can read the plus number. Those are the ones that people are most interested in.
Okay, so I am supposed to pick the question that is most voted.
Yeah, just for example, the one I was trying to give to Joachim earlier on was this border issue between Denmark and Poland, what was resolved through a project, what was the issue, how it was resolved, and how do you think the resolution was successful? This was something that was directed to Joachim earlier. I don't know if you want to pick it up or not.
No, it's really a very tricky question, and actually I should not say so much about that because I don't have the facts, all the facts. But as we are doing the plans, as we are handling a lot of data, we also see that there are differences in how you present your zones, your economic zones, your territorial waters and so on in the maps. Depending on history, depending on the development GIS and GPS and so on. And one area was highlighted in an area between, it's called the gray zone between Poland and Denmark. So as I understand, the Polish colleagues and Danish colleagues might correct me, but it was highlighted also by these countries. So in the end, they came up with an agreement how to deal with this area when it comes to planning and when it comes to delimitation of the zones. So it was not the project as such that solved the problem, but it was highlighted in the MSP project, you can say. And having these kind of differences in the map does not necessarily mean that this is a problem. It's just something that you have to deal with. Yes.
Thank you. One of the most voted questions regards failures, and I think it's very important to tackle this point. It says, talking about the good lessons, but what are the main failures of the transboundary cooperation in your region? What did you not work and why? This is also interesting and important, of course. So I'd like to ask all the panelists to say a few words on this.
No, failure is a strong word because normally we call it challenges. But, but I'm coming back to this data issue because we have actually we have an expert group, a subgroup to the Helcom group dealing with data, a very important group. And one of their tasks was actually to deal with input data as well as output data. And input data is actually the planning evidence you need for planning. And the output data is the actual plans that you deliver at the end. And they really tried to get the grip of this input data, but it turned out to be really difficult because they had the experience and the lessons learned that this data is handled by a lot of institutions. You need certain knowledge to understand them and to deal with them, and it's very complex to combine them. So I wouldn't say it's a failure, but even though there are some data published through this base map on the Helcom website, input data, we would like to see more in future or more links to that kind of data in future. So I would say that's I would call it a failure, maybe a small failure, maybe, but challenge.
Also, I can't identify some failure, but I think that as the main challenging issue, as I told you, it was in working together with Romania, and now I am thinking about the process of coordinating our first maritime special plan with the others non-EU countries. like Turkey and Ukraine and Georgia. I think that the biggest challenge is to have a common understanding about the main issues in the process. And for our country in Romania, it was the main challenge, but not the failure. I hope no, it's not a failure at all, but it was the main challenge, and also to provide the information, the necessary information, as I told you before also. Provide data and all necessary information. Because of different, sometimes to share the information is related to national interests, and sometimes we need to be very flexible, and at expert level you can't resolve some problems which are not at this level to solve. They are really at very they are very important on the very highest political level, which is also important because, for example, we are planning the sea together with Romania, but we have not agreed on EEZ. And we are agreement with for EEZ with Turkey, but not with Romania. That means that we plan together our territorial sea, but not the EEZ, because we don't have agreement with our neighbors. That means that sometimes we have these are challenges, and during the implementation of our plans, I hope that we will solve all these problems. But I don't think that there is a question to speak about failures, for my point of view.
I think doing my research in UK, I need to mention that Brexit has been a main challenge for actually transboundary MSP. So, and the uncertainty actually around it, it's actually prevented some marine planning authorities in terms of even Northern Ireland for even publishing their plans, and also in engagement processes as well. So I would say if we are talking about challenge and coming from doing my research in UK, I would say Brexit has been one of the issues.
Thank you, Kofi. I think that we have a very popular question here, 34 votes. Not sure that the panelists can answer, but let's try. Who funds cooperation after 2021? Maybe we should ask Felix to answer this question, I don't know. But if you want to try.
And there are microphones for the audience as well. If there is an answer, please stand up.
Let's skip and move to the next question. No, it's.
No, but I mean, hopefully there are more arguments and motivations for cooperation than the EU funding. I mean, still, I think we can have a good cooperation even without that much EU funding. It might be a little bit less, but we can use all the other systems we have. We cooperate within the regional seas organizations and so on. So I think it will be possible, and also I think it's good, and each of us really show that we want to cooperate, and that we do by assigning resources to this cooperation. So I think it's even though of course it has been extremely useful to have this EU funding as a trigger for cooperation. It has enabled so much work and so much learning during these years.
Now, there are several questions, more or less both that deal with the role of stakeholder engagement consultation processes in transboundary MSP. I'd like you to ask a comment based on your experience on the specific importance of that step of the MSP process to promote transboundary MSP. Kofi, do you want to start maybe?
I think this issue, I think most of the time stakeholder engagement in transboundary aspect has been done on a very informal basis. I think within the Celtic Sea, there's a Sea Maritime Forum, which has been a platform for stakeholders and users to actually come together to engage on transboundary issues. But I think what we need to be talking about is how do you make that formal in terms of having a formal system, because then I don't think the Aarhus Convention really mentions specifically what happens to transboundary cooperation when it comes to transboundary cooperation. So I think what has been done in the past is it's normally being done through the contact point, the major contact point, MSP contact point. But I think this should be furthered on. That it's critical. It's very important that in the future there should be a formal approach. There should be guidelines actually that specifies how transboundary stakeholders can be engaged. And I mentioned the fact that in the UK there has been marine planning partnerships that have also been used. I think this is also an option that could be also explored if we are using coastal partnerships or coastal platforms to also engage cross-border stakeholders as well. Yep.
Yes, I completely agree with Kofi's words, and I think that according to my experience, when we did the first Mars Plan BS project, we did our stakeholder consultations apart Romania and Bulgaria, but we don't make it together. And now at the second stage of Mars Plan BS2 project, we intend to mostly to make stakeholder consultations together between Romanian and Bulgarian stakeholders, and we will carry out, I think, 3 meetings, stakeholder meetings, on the area of Mangalia-Shabla and also at the higher level, because, as I told you, the local level, we have to have all the questions raised from the local at Bulgaria, in Romania, the coastal area, and after that to discuss all these things between different experts, different ministries, to raise all problems, to look at the legislation, at all issues that we have to solve. And this is for the second stage of Mars Plan BS2 project. I hope that we will realize all our objectives.
Okay, I'd like to take the opportunity of this stakeholder kind of cultural language issue to ask the panelists or some of the panelists to answer to one question that regards non-EU member states. How the EU member states could improve cooperation with non-EU countries. In Baltic Sea, it would be cooperation with Russia. In Black Sea, also other countries around the Black Sea, like Turkey, Georgia, and others. This is a key issue. I'm coming from the Mediterranean, so it's very, very important.
Yes, indeed, for the Baltic Sea it's extremely important. In the Baltic Sea we have Russia, of course, and we have been cooperating in many different ways on MSP. And as you know, Russia is a very active member of HELCOM and VASAB and the HELCOM VASAB group. So we have a formal cooperation as well. Then, of course, we have all these EU-funded projects, and in some of them, Russia has been invited to participate. And there will also be a new project starting this autumn. There will be a kickoff this week. It's called the Capacity for MSP, and there are 2 Russian institutions part of that project. So we have used different channels to increase our cooperation. Then, of course, our Russian colleagues have invited us many times to Russia, to the Baltic Sea Days and so on. So that's how we try to keep this going and keep the energy in the cooperation, because it's really important that we are all on board. And we have to remember that this roadmap for MSP in the Baltic Sea, it covers all Baltic Sea countries, not only the European countries. So, yes.
I think that our approach is firstly we have now a common agenda on the Black Sea, and that all the ministers of the responsible ministers for the marine issues, marine sector, they signed this common agenda for the Black Sea, for the blue growth in the Black Sea. And we will follow up this agenda and we'll stick to the agenda in elaboration, during the elaboration of our MSP. And also we, in our project for cross-border cooperation, we established an advisory board where all we have representative from Turkey, from Ukraine, we have representative from the Black Sea Commission Against Pollution, and we have representative from the Black Sea Economic Organization. And also we invited experienced experts from the Mediterranean Sea. He's present here, Emiliano Ramieri. Also we invited representative from ioc-unesco, Alejandro. And we have also from the Baltic Sea, Mr. Zaucha. I saw him in the hall also. And we think that together with all these experts and also institutions, we can exchange different themes, topics, issues, and so on. And step by step, the persons, the persons from Turkey, from Ukraine, will be involved in all this process, and after that we will approach the official institutions, of course, according to ESPO Convention, where we don't have, we are not EU countries.
Thank you, Maria. We have 7-8 minutes left. I think there's time for a couple of questions. One question is kind of widely voted, can take just a few minutes to be answered. If country only start MSP, what 3 existing maritime spatial plan they should read for inspiration? The 3 most voted MSP plans. In your opinion, of course, targeting transboundary MSP, I would say, but up to you.
So should we stick to transboundary MSP?
I mean, this is the subject of the session, so let's target this.
So if I'll take this. So the question is about if a country is starting MSP, which 3 marine spatial plans they should read as inspiration. I think I'll talk for my personal view anyway, and not to be favorite any country, but I think maybe the Norwegian plan would be one plan to look at, because then they start from the bottom up, doing cumulative assessment and environmental assessments before building all their strategies and their policies. So I think that would definitely be one plan to look at, the Norwegian plan. Apart from that, as a personal favorite, I like the Belgian plan as well. I like the Belgium in terms of how they introduce scenarios in the Belgian plan, and very direct. And the fact that I went through a piecemeal approach, starting with certain sectors, then they built it up on from a marine zoning plan up until it became a marine spatial plan. So I think it actually shows how MSP can be picked up at a very small scale and built up into something that can be a plan. So I would say these 2 plans would be my favorite plans that any marine planner should be looking at as inspiration to do their marine plan as well.
Thank you. Joachim?
Well, first I would say that we don't have any good or bad plans. We only have plans, and the plans actually depends on the context. It depends on how you organize things in each country, which could be very different. So I think you should read a variety of plans. I mean, try to pick. I mean, the Belgian one is very interesting. It's also very nice to look at. But you can also look at, for example, the German plan, which is quite detailed and very into zoning. Or you can pick the Scottish plans, more into strategic planning and so on. So I think you should choose a variety of plans, actually.
Fully agree with this. Maria?
I completely agree that I think that every plan has something that we can learn about and that we will discover, and it is interesting for you. But if from my point of view, I think that I will pick up some plan from, for example, the plan of Poland, of Latvia, because they are most close to our development. I don't know, but I will pick this kind of plans. And also from the Mediterranean Sea, some different country. That is my point of view.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now, I am picking up the last question, which is not that voted, but I think it could be a good question to conclude the session. 337, and the question is, can we expect genuine joint cross-border maritime plans in the future? And the follow-up is, do we need them? Well, I think we need them, but can we expect genuine plans? Please.
Well, looking at the work we have done in the Baltic Sea region, I don't think we will see plans that are really, one plan. And that's simply because we have different systems. We have different administrative systems, different licensing systems, so that won't work. So instead we have to find what's common between the plans, and we have to find something that we call a functional coherence. The plans have to work together. If you have shipping lines that are of different width, because you have different regulations, still the center line is the key point. So I don't think we will see that, for the next decade, at least not in the Baltic Sea region.
Okay, I think that they are very, very important. During my experience for the two projects, Mars Plan BES, that we are doing the cross-border maritime special planning, I think that it is very important neighboring countries to develop together the cross-border area and to do the plan together, because there is, as we discovered during the process of implementation of the project, there is different priorities. For example, for Bulgaria, in this cross-border area, we have mostly marine protected areas. They have more developed areas with tourism and so on. If we don't have discussions and to discover the main priorities and how to solve problems, conflicts, and how to develop our Black Sea and our neighboring area together, we can't go further. We can't develop in the future, which is crucial for both countries, for the socio-economic development of both countries.
I think one of the few examples of actually joint plan is not a joint marine spatial plan, but it was more of a joint sectorial plan. And we can refer to the Barents Sea between Norway and Russia, whereby they have the agreement for fisheries zones, fisheries catch, and also for offshore oil spills. So that could be an example, but again, that is also on a very much sectorial level. And that's what we have. So I think what we could be heading towards is having probably a non-binding transboundary or joint plan. But in terms of it being static, I think that's where the challenge is, because then we have all these cross-border sectorial plans. It's just about when it comes to MSP, then because it's cross-sectorial and at the same time it's supposed to be cross-border, that's where the challenge is. So I think probably in the future, what we could be heading towards is having maybe a non-binding joint marine spatial plan rather than having something which is more statutory.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, time to conclude. I think that the session was very interesting, combining both, say, conceptual advices and concrete experiences and perspectives, visions on the future. So I'd like to thank for this the speakers for delivering their experience to us. there's nothing to say to conclude. They said everything. I just want to borrow a sentence that I heard this morning from the colleague Anna, the coordinator of Ocean Matters, in her presentation at the EMSEG meeting. And the phrase is, keep calm and accept the challenge, or the failure. No, I think that this is perfect, just summing up what we've heard and discussed up to now. Thank you very much, and I leave the floor to
Yes, give a big hand to everybody on the panel.